Right now, Chevy dealers are slashing prices by tens of thousands of dollars. We're talking $32,000 off per vehicle in some cases. This isn't your typical end-of-year clearance sale. Something went seriously wrong, and I'm going to walk you through exactly what happened, from the factory floor to the dealer showrooms where salespeople are practically begging customers to take these cars off their hands. So here's the thing. I was on the production floor the morning everything started falling apart. Usually, you walk in and everything runs like clockwork. Assembly lines moving at their regular pace, screens showing normal output numbers, workers at their stations doing the same choreographed movements they've done thousands of times. But that morning was different. The scheduling screens were showing this massive spike in production. I'm talking numbers that made engineers who'd been doing this for 20 years just stop and stare. Our forecasting system, the algorithm that's supposed to predict how many cars people actually want to buy, was telling us to build way more vehicles than usual. Not just a little bump for a new model launch. We're talking about a production increase that would normally take months of planning and approvals. At first, everyone thought it was a glitch. Maybe the system hiccuped or pulled bad data from the wrong quarter. These things happen in manufacturing. A decimal point gets moved, someone imports last year's holiday numbers instead of this year's projections. But then they ran the validation 3 times, and it kept showing the same numbers. That's when people started getting nervous. I remember standing there watching the senior production manager's face go from confused to concerned to almost pale. He'd been through product recalls, supply chain disruptions, labor disputes. But this was different. This was the system telling him to flood the market with vehicles based on demand that he knew, deep down, probably wasn't real. The problem is, once the system says build this many cars, the whole operation kicks into gear. Robots start working, parts start moving down the line, suppliers get orders for components, shift schedules get adjusted, and nobody wants to be the person who hits the emergency stop button on something that massive. You're talking about millions of dollars in operational momentum. So production kept going. The algorithm kept insisting people wanted all these cars. And the plant listened because that's what it's designed to do. The whole manufacturing philosophy for the past decade has been about trusting the data, letting the numbers drive decisions. Human intuition gets overruled by what the spreadsheet says. By lunch, there were already extra vehicle frames stacking up at the end of the assembly line. The prediction was wrong, but by the time anyone realized it, they'd already committed to building thousands of extra vehicles. I talked to one of the line supervisors later, and he told me he knew something was off by mid-morning. The pace felt wrong. The volume didn't match what he was seeing in the news about car sales or hearing from his brother-in-law who sells cars in Michigan. But what's he supposed to do? Walk up to corporate and say his gut feeling contradicts a multi-million-dollar forecasting system? Now, you might be wondering how this even happens. How does a major automaker's forecasting system get it so wrong? We're talking about General Motors here, not some startup trying to predict trends with a basic Excel formula. The strategy team noticed something was off when their spreadsheets stopped matching reality. They had these demand predictions based on 10 years of consumer data. Purchase patterns, demographic trends, economic indicators, seasonal fluctuations. Historically, these models had been pretty reliable. You could predict within a few percentage points how many Silverados would sell in Texas in July or how many Equinoxes would move in California in November. But suddenly, the numbers weren't adding up. Sales reports from Q1 didn't match the projections. Q2 came in even further off. By Q3, it was like the model was predicting weather for a different planet. Interest rates had changed. The Fed had been adjusting rates throughout the year, making car loans more expensive. Competition had gotten fiercer. Ford was crushing it with their new electric lineup. Toyota couldn't keep certain models on the lot. Tesla had adjusted their pricing strategy and was pulling buyers who might have otherwise considered a Chevy EV. Customers were buying different brands, ones that had adapted faster to what people actually wanted. But the forecasting system was still using old assumptions, treating the market like it was still 2019. Back when interest rates were low, gas prices were stable, and the competition looked completely different. The algorithm had been trained on data from a world that didn't exist anymore. The team spent hours in meetings trying to figure out if the data was corrupted or if the whole algorithm had a blind spot they'd never noticed. Every time they checked one number, it created 2 new problems. They'd find an inconsistency in the regional data, trace it back, and discover 3 more anomalies in the underlying assumptions. The forecasts looked less like predictions and more like random guesses. One analyst told me she spent an entire weekend rebuilding a model from scratch, thinking maybe there was a coding error. She found nothing. The code was fine. The problem was that the world had changed, and nobody had updated the inputs to reflect that reality. By the time leadership asked for a full investigation, the orders based on those bad forecasts had already gone out to the manufacturing plants. And here's the thing about car production at this scale. Once you start building, you can't just reverse it. The steel's been stamped. The parts have been ordered from suppliers across 3 continents. Workers have been scheduled. Shipping has been arranged. Those cars are getting made whether you want them or not. If you're following along and want to see how this plays out, hit the like button and subscribe. Drop a comment and let me know if you've seen these massive discounts at your local Chevy dealer, because what happens next gets even wilder. So now GM has all these extra vehicles being built, thousands of them rolling off assembly lines every single day. That's when the logistics nightmare started. The transport system started backing up. Trucks that normally move through the yard smoothly were forming these massive lines. We're talking lines stretching for miles. Drivers were literally joking about needing food delivered because they were waiting so long just to load up and get out. And this wasn't because of weather or some supplier issue or a trucker shortage. It was pure volume. Cars were coming off the assembly line faster than they could be moved. Think about the physics of that for a second. Every vehicle needs to be loaded onto a truck, driven to a rail yard, or driven directly to a dealership. Each truck can carry maybe 8 to 10 vehicles depending on the model. Each rail car can carry about 15. You need drivers. You need rail capacity. You need coordination. The storage lots started filling up. These aren't small lots either. We're talking about massive fields that can hold thousands of vehicles. But when you're overproducing by this much, even those spaces get overwhelmed. GM rented extra land, put up temporary fencing, hired security to watch over these new lots, and watched them fill up in days, not weeks. Days. Satellite images from that time period show just rows and rows of unsold vehicles sitting there. Someone online compared them to aerial shots of abandoned cars after a natural disaster, except these were all brand new. Perfect paint jobs, plastic still on the seats, maybe 50 miles on the odometer from being driven around the facility. The transport companies started asking for higher rates. When demand spikes like this, they know they have leverage. Some refuse to take more loads because they couldn't handle the volume or didn't have enough drivers available. You can't just snap your fingers and create more trucking capacity. The whole distribution network was clogged, and it spread outward from the central hubs like a traffic jam. One logistics coordinator told me it was like watching a river overflow. The cars kept coming, but the channels to move them were already full, so they just pooled up, filling every available space. You don't realize how much physical space cars take up until you literally run out of places to put them. A single parking lot at a shopping mall might hold 500 cars. Now imagine you need space for 50,000. Where do you put them? You start renting farmers' fields, empty lots, closed shopping centers, anywhere with pavement or grass that can support the weight. And all this time, the costs are mounting. You're paying for the extra land, the extra security, the insurance on all that inventory just sitting there exposed to weather, the interest on the loans you took out to build these vehicles in the first place. Every day those cars sit there, they're costing money and generating zero revenue. The problem kept getting worse, and eventually it landed on the desks of the top executives. That's when things got serious. When the crisis hit the executive floor, you could feel the energy change. Senior leaders gathered for emergency meetings. This wasn't a problem that could be solved with a memo or a small adjustment to the marketing budget. They were looking at hundreds of thousands of vehicles that had been built based on faulty projections, lots full of inventory across multiple states. Transport networks jammed, and dealerships that definitely didn't have space or demand for all these extra cars. I heard the initial meetings were brutal. Finance was panicking about the carrying costs. Marketing was trying to figure out how to spin this. Operations was still trying to slow down production without creating even more problems. Legal was worried about dealer agreements and whether they could even force dealers to take inventory they didn't order. Here's what happened next. Those vehicles had to go somewhere. They couldn't just sit in fields forever. The weather would damage them. They'd depreciate. The next model year was coming, so they got shipped to dealerships across the country, whether those dealers wanted them or not. Dealerships started receiving trucks full of vehicles they hadn't ordered and couldn't sell at normal prices. A dealer in Ohio told me he got 27 Blazers in 1 week when he'd only requested 5. His lot only had space for 15 vehicles total. Where was he supposed to put them? He ended up parking them in the street behind his building, hoping the city wouldn't ticket him. Their lots filled up. Their financing costs went up because they had to pay for all that inventory just sitting there. Floor plan financing, the loans dealers use to stock their lots, charges interest every single day. So every Silverado gathering dust is costing the dealer money. They were stuck. That's when the discounting started. First, it was a few $1,000s off. Standard stuff, the kind of rebates you see advertised on TV. Then $10,000. Then $15,000. Dealers were getting desperate. They had new inventory coming in for the next model year, but they couldn't make room because the current models weren't moving. Then the discounts hit $20,000. Then $25,000. Now we're seeing discounts as high as $32,000 on some models. Let that number sink in for a second. That's more than some entire cars cost. Dealers are selling these vehicles at massive losses just to move them and free up space. A dealer in Florida told me he sold a fully loaded Tahoe, sticker price around $75,000, for $43,000 just to get it off his lot. He lost money on the deal, but he needed the space for incoming inventory and couldn't afford to keep paying interest on a vehicle that had been sitting there for 4 months. The irony is brutal. GM built all these extra cars because the algorithm said there was huge demand, but there wasn't. So now they're selling them at unprecedented discounts, which tanks their profit margins and damages the brand's value perception. When you can get $32,000 off a vehicle, what does that tell you about what it's actually worth? It changes how customers think about the brand going forward. Why would you ever pay full price for a Chevy again when you know they were selling them for half off just a few months ago? It creates this expectation that if you just wait long enough, you'll get an insane deal. And it's not just the immediate sales, it's the residual values, the trade-in values, the certified pre-owned market. If new Chevys are being dumped at these prices, what happens to the value of a 3-year-old Chevy? It tanks. People who bought these vehicles a year or two ago and are trying to trade them in are finding out their cars are worth way less than they expected. This whole situation shows what happens when companies rely too heavily on algorithms without questioning the underlying assumptions. The data the system was using was outdated. The market had changed. Consumer preferences had shifted. Economic conditions were different, but nobody caught it in time, and the machine kept running. There's also a human element here that gets missed. When you automate decision-making to this degree, you remove the people who might notice something's wrong. The salesperson who's talking to customers every day and hearing what they actually want. The regional manager who's seeing trends across multiple dealerships. The product planner who follows the competition and knows what's resonating with buyers. All of that institutional knowledge gets overridden by what the spreadsheet says. And when the spreadsheet is wrong, everyone pays the price. Now Chevy's dealing with the aftermath, massive inventory they need to clear, dealers who are frustrated and losing money, and customers who are wondering if they should wait for even bigger discounts. The question is, how much further will these prices drop? If dealers are already at $32,000 off and they still have inventory to move, we might see even deeper cuts in the coming weeks. Some industry analysts are predicting we could see discounts hit $35,000 or even $40,000 on certain high-end models as dealers get truly desperate to clear space before the new model year arrives. And here's something else to consider. This happened to Chevy, but the same algorithms, the same forecasting systems are used across the entire industry. Are other manufacturers looking at this and checking their own numbers? Or are they setting themselves up for the same collapse? So here's what I want to know. Have you seen these discounts at your local Chevy dealer? Are you thinking about taking advantage of these prices? Or does it make you worried about the brand's stability and what your vehicle will be worth in a few years? Let me know in the comments below, and make sure you're subscribed because I'll be tracking how this situation develops and whether other manufacturers start showing the same warning signs.